The rain came down in thick, gray sheets the day Ella Reeves stood before the old, rusted gates of Hollow Creek Farm. Her breath fogged up the windshield of the rental car as she sat in silence, hands gripping the steering wheel, engine off. Before her stretched a long, winding dirt road blanketed in wet leaves and crawling with puddles that reflected the dying light of the overcast sky. At the end of the road, barely visible through the fog and trees, stood the house, her grandfather's house. Her house now. Ella had barely known the man. Her parents had cut ties with him when she was still a child, citing reasons they never fully explained. Her mother had once said, "Some land carries curses, Ella. Some places hold memories too heavy to bury." At the time, she'd thought it was poetic nonsense. Now, it echoed in her mind as she looked at the skeletal branches swaying in the wind. The gate groaned in protest as she pushed it open. Grass grew tall on either side of the path, clawing at the sides of her jeans as she walked toward the house. The farmhouse loomed large, 3 stories of rotting wood, broken shutters, and a sagging porch that looked ready to collapse beneath the weight of memory. A single light was on in an upstairs window. Odd. The property was supposed to have been abandoned for over a year. The air smelled of mildew, old wood, and something fainter, iron-like. Metallic. She dismissed it as rust. The front door opened with a moan. Inside, the air was thick with dust and cold. Her boots echoed on hardwood as she stepped into the main hallway. Cobwebs clung to every corner, and old portraits lined the walls. Men and women with solemn faces, all staring down at her. One portrait, an old man with sharp eyes and a weathered face, stood out. Her grandfather. A letter sat on a small table beneath the painting, addressed to her. The envelope was yellowed, the ink faded but legible. Ella. If you're reading this, it means I've passed on and the land now belongs to you. This house, this soil, it carries more than memories. Hollow Creek is not like other places. It remembers. It listens. And it protects what is buried here. Whatever you do, do not disturb the root cellar. Some things are meant to remain in the dark. Samuel Reeves. Ella read the letter twice, then a third time. The handwriting was shaky, frantic. Something about it made her stomach twist. She explored the rest of the house slowly. The living room was full of antique furniture covered in sheets. A dusty chandelier hung from the ceiling. The fireplace still had ashes in it. Upstairs, she found 3 bedrooms, hers now, one that looked like it belonged to a child once, and another locked tight. No key in sight. She found the kitchen last. Old pots still hung from the rack. A single dining chair lay on its side. The back door was bolted, but through the window, she could see the path that led around the house. Toward the barn. And somewhere beyond that, the root cellar. She didn't sleep that night. The wind scraped at the windows. The house groaned like an old man rising from a long rest. And at some point past midnight, she heard it, a thump, deep and distant, like something heavy shifting underground. She told herself it was the wind. Just the wind. But Ella Reeves had just stepped into a story older than her bloodline. One that the soil beneath Hollow Creek had been whispering for generations. Ella awoke to sunlight slanting through cracked curtains and dust dancing in the beams like falling ash. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but the quiet that now blanketed the house was unnerving. It felt, too still, as though something were holding its breath. Her thoughts lingered on the thump she'd heard in the night. She tried to brush it off, but it stuck to her like the smell of the old house, impossible to ignore. She dressed quickly and went outside. The air was crisp and damp from the previous night's rain, and mist still clung to the treetops in the distance. She followed the faint trail behind the house, past the skeletal barn with its caved-in roof, to a small hill overgrown with thistle and vine. There, partially hidden beneath layers of moss and rust, was the entrance to the root cellar. It was exactly as described in the letter, ancient, sunken into the earth like a wound. Thick wooden doors arched downward, reinforced with iron. A padlock hung from the latch, rusted but still firm. She knelt, tracing her fingers along the edge. There were carvings in the wood, like the ones inside the house. Strange, overlapping circles, crude eyes, lines slashed at odd angles. A chill ran down her spine. She stood up quickly, brushing dirt from her jeans, heart pounding. She had no intention of opening it. Not now. Maybe not ever. But as she turned to leave, she caught something from the corner of her eye. A shadow, faint and flickering, like someone ducking behind a tree. "Hello?" she called. No answer. Ella stared into the woods for a long moment before shaking her head and walking back toward the house. Halfway there, she felt a sting on her forearm. She looked down to find a deep scratch bleeding through the fabric of her sleeve. She hadn't noticed being cut. There were no thorns near the path. Inside, she cleaned the wound in the bathroom. The water came out brown at first, then cleared. As she dabbed it with alcohol, she noticed something strange. Just beneath the surface of her skin, near the scratch, were faint lines, like symbols. As if someone had drawn on her with a razor-thin needle. The same symbols from the cellar. She stumbled back from the mirror, her breath ragged. She had to leave. She wasn't ready for this. She packed a small bag and went for her car. The engine didn't start. She tried again. And again. Nothing. And then, as she sat in the silent vehicle, something tapped on the rear window. Once. Twice. She turned slowly. There was no one. But on the fogged-up glass, letters began to appear, drawn by an invisible hand. Stay. Ella didn't sleep for the next 2 nights. She tried keeping every light on in the house. She dragged the couch into the kitchen so she could sleep near the door. She checked every window before bed and tried starting her car every hour. It never worked. The battery wasn't dead. There was just something wrong, something deeper, something willful. And now the root cellar wasn't the only thing keeping her up. She had begun to hear footsteps in the upstairs hallway. Heavy, deliberate. As if someone, or something, was pacing just outside the door. But every time she opened it, the hallway was empty. One night, she awoke to find all the kitchen chairs stacked on top of the table. Another night, she discovered dozens of handprints pressed into the condensation on the bathroom mirror. Small handprints. Children's handprints. That was when she remembered the locked door upstairs. It had been bothering her. She'd found no key, and every attempt to force it open had failed. But after the mirror incident, she noticed something new. The air near that door had grown colder. A chill that sunk into her bones. And the smell, like damp soil, mold, and rot, emanated from beneath it. Determined, she searched every drawer, cupboard, and closet until she found an old ring of keys in the sewing room behind the stairs. One of them, ancient and ornate, seemed promising. Her hand trembled as she approached the door. The key slid in with surprising ease. The lock clicked. The door creaked open slowly. The room was a child's nursery. At least, it had been once. The wallpaper was peeling, its floral patterns faded and yellow. A crib sat in the corner, the mobile above it spinning slowly, though there was no wind. Toys were scattered across the floor, covered in a thick layer of dust. And on the far wall, drawn in crayon, were dozens of stick figures, all with blackened eyes. Some were missing limbs. Some had red excess over their faces. All were staring at her. Ella's heart pounded in her chest. Then she saw it, a music box on a small rocking chair, slowly opening by itself. It played a lullaby. Off-key, mechanical. Rockabye baby. Suddenly the chair rocked violently, crashing to the floor. The music stopped. A new message had appeared on the wall, freshly written in red crayon. You opened the wrong door. The next morning, Ella ventured outside again, drawn to the old orchard behind the barn. The trees were half dead, gnarled and twisted like arthritic fingers. Apples, strangely fresh-looking, hung from some of the branches, red as blood. She had a strange urge to pick one, but her hand hesitated. They felt too perfect, too intentional. She walked further in. The orchard stretched wider than it looked from the house. The mist hung low between the trees, obscuring the view. Then, in the distance, she saw a figure. A man. Standing still. Facing away. He wore a wide brim. Hat and long coat. His hands hung limp at his sides. Something about the stillness of his posture felt wrong, too rigid, too posed. Ella called out. Hello? The man didn't move. She took a cautious step forward. Sir? Are you lost? Suddenly, his head twisted, not turned, twisted, to the side, then snapped forward again. Slowly, he began to shuffle toward her. Ella backed away. He kept coming. His legs dragged like they barely worked. As he got closer, she saw his face, pale, stretched, mouth sewn shut with thick black thread. His eyes were open wide and bleeding. She turned and ran. Branches tore at her clothes as she sprinted back to the house, heart pounding, lungs screaming. When she reached the porch, she dared to look back. The orchard was empty. But as she fumbled with the door handle, she noticed something new. An apple. Sitting on the porch step. Bright red. Fresh. Waiting. Ella didn't step outside for the rest of the day. She locked every door, closed every curtain, and sat on the living room floor with her back to the wall, staring at the door, waiting for the man to return. But he never came. Not physically, at least. That night, she heard voices. Not from the hall, not from outside, but from beneath the floorboards. Whispers. They rose and fell like wind through trees, except the words were clear. She sees us. She opened the door. Bring her down. She moved to the kitchen and grabbed the flashlight again, then lifted the rug by the pantry. Beneath it, old wooden planks groaned under her feet. One looked newer than the others, replaced. She tapped on it. Hollow. It took all her strength to pry it up, revealing a narrow crawlspace. The air that rose from the hole was cold and moist, like breath. She knelt and peered in. More symbols. Carved into the dirt walls. Candles long melted into the soil. And bones, dozens of tiny bones. Animals? She hoped so. Something moved in the dark. She scrambled back, slamming the plank down and throwing the rug over it. She didn't sleep that night either. Because just before dawn, she heard scratching beneath her bed. The next morning, Ella rifled through the attic, searching for answers. She hadn't dared go up there until now, but the sounds in the night were growing louder, scratching, weeping, laughter. All of it beneath the house. She needed to understand what her grandfather had meant in his letter. The attic was dust-choked and packed with boxes labeled in her grandfather's handwriting. Ledger's 1972, old equipment, maps. One box stood out, unlabeled, set apart from the rest. Inside, she found a leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked, and the pages yellowed and brittle. March 3, 1998, the girl came back again. Not my Ella, the other one. She stands in the orchard and hums. Can't speak. Mouth sewn shut. I told her to go back, but she won't. She waits. March 12, 1998, the root cellar groaned again tonight. I reinforced the door. Carved the old symbols into the beams. They keep the hungry ones away, for now. April 1st, 1998, I made a deal. Had no choice. They wanted blood. Gave them the land. Not enough. Never enough. The entries became more unhinged. Ramblings about voices, bargains, rituals. Names scratched out. Pages torn. May 19, 2001, if Ella ever comes here, if she inherits, God help her. She must not open the root cellar. Ella's hands trembled. She flipped to the final entry. June 2, 2004, they want me now. I've sealed the door with salt and ash. But the roots run deeper than I thought. She is coming. She wears Ella's face. I see her in my dreams. The page was smeared with blood. Ella dropped the journal. Outside the attic window, the orchard swayed in windless air. And among the trees, the man waited. That night, the air was thicker, like the very atmosphere was suffocating her. Every surface of the house vibrated with tension. Even the insects had gone silent outside. She sat in the hallway with the journal in her lap, debating whether to call for help. But her phone was dead, no signal. No surprise. Every avenue to the outside world had been cut off. Around midnight, the house shuddered. Boom. It came from the cellar. She crept outside with her flashlight, bare feet on wet grass, breath fogging in the unseasonable cold. The root cellar door was wide open. No lock. No chains. Just blackness yawning like a mouth. She considered running. But something pulled her forward. Maybe it was the blood. Maybe it was the voice, her mother's voice, calling faintly from within. She descended. The air was thick and damp, smelling of rot and something older. The walls were carved with hundreds of symbols, some pulsing faintly with light. Deeper in, she found remnants of rituals, animal bones, melted wax, dried flowers. And then, at the center, a stone slab, covered in roots and soaked in something dark. She touched it. The roots moved. They coiled around her wrist like fingers. And she heard them. Give us back what was taken. She screamed and pulled away, scrambling up the stairs. But when she reached the surface, the sky had changed. It was no longer night. It was red. And the house behind her was glowing. Alive, the house was different now. The wallpaper crawled. The floors throbbed. Mirrors reflected not what stood before them, but what waited. Ella avoided them, until one morning, her reflection didn't. She had wandered into the upstairs bathroom, numb, dirty, and exhausted. She looked into the cracked mirror above the sink and gasped. Her reflection blinked before she did. It smiled first. It reached toward her, its fingers smearing blood across the glass, even though her hands were clean. The mirror cracked, spiderwebbing from the center. Behind her, the nursery door creaked open on its own. She turned slowly, trembling. Inside, the rocking chair moved again. But this time, it held something. A doll. Hand-stitched, its mouth sewn shut, its dress matching the one from the portrait she'd found in the attic, a child she didn't know, but somehow recognized. The tag around its wrist read, "For Ella." She threw it across the room. It landed with a soft thud. The music box began to play again. And behind her, the mirror whispered, "She's here." When Ella turned back to it, the reflection was no longer hers. It was the girl from the orchard. And she was crying blood. The house began to pulse. Ella could feel it in the walls, in the floor beneath her feet. It wasn't just alive, it was hungry. She couldn't run. The land twisted now, paths shifting, trees looming in unfamiliar places. Every time she tried to leave, she ended up back at the porch. The orchard bled. Red sap dripped from the trunks. Apples burst with rot. The man no longer stood still, he followed her, always just out of reach, his stitched mouth twitching with each step. She returned to the cellar. The slab still pulsed. The roots had formed a circle now. At its center lay the doll. She picked it up. It blinked. Trade, a voice echoed in her mind. Suddenly, memories not her own flooded in, children buried, voices silenced, promises broken. Her grandfather had made a deal. Blood for peace. Generations trapped in the soil. And now, they wanted her. She placed the doll on the slab. The roots recoiled, then surged upward, grabbing her legs. She screamed. But the man from the orchard stepped forward, and nodded. He took the doll. And vanished. The house groaned, then fell silent that it was morning. Sunlight filtered through the trees. The air was still. The cellar door was gone, replaced by grass and wildflowers. Ella stood in the orchard, barefoot, calm. She didn't remember walking there. The man was gone. So were the whispers. She returned to the house. It was clean now. The rot had vanished. The portraits on the wall smiled faintly. In the mirror, her reflection matched her once more. She found another letter on the table. New ink. Fresh. You listened. You gave what was owed. You are now the keeper. Protect the roots. Guard the silence. Outside, a car engine started. Hers. She could leave. But as she reached the porch, she turned back. And smiled. Somewhere below, the roots stirred. And Hollow Creek breathed.